Hey guys! In this world, beauty didn't mean looking healthy. It meant looking like you just stepped out of a coffin, and that was a compliment. Pale as candle wax. Cheeks so hollow they could hold water. Eyes ringed in shadows like you hadn't slept in weeks. You weren't sick. You were stunning. And the stranger part, everyone agreed. Forget the castles and chivalry Hollywood sold you, this was the reality. And the truth is, you probably wouldn't survive a single day in it. If that sounds ridiculous, remember we have our own version. They had white lead paint that poisoned the skin. We have filters that smooth it until it barely looks human. Both promise the same thing, an impossible face, just different tools. Picture this, you're standing in front of a polished bronze mirror, candlelight trembling on the walls. The air smells faintly of beeswax and old linen. Your skin is powdered chalk white, your forehead plucked high, your eyebrows are raised to thin ghosts. Somewhere, someone is looking at you and thinking, perfect. Before we start, pull up a blanket, dim the lights. If this kind of slow, strange history is your cup of tea, settle in, but only if you truly enjoy it. Now leave the 21st century behind. No selfies, no natural glow creams, no quick filters. We're going somewhere colder, darker and stranger, the Middle Ages where beauty was a layered code, skin, hair, forehead, teeth, posture, scent and even virtue. By the end of tonight, you'll know why women erased their eyebrows, why men wore shoes that could trip a horse, and why smelling like roses might mean you hadn't touched water in weeks. 7 centuries of rules, 20 ways they played the game. And the more you hear, the more you'll realise you already know the rules. They've just changed costumes. They've just changed costumes. Imagine standing in a stone chamber so cold you can see your breath. A single candle burns on the table, its light flickering across the warped surface of a bronze mirror. You lean in, searching for the face that will decide your place in the world. Not the strength of your handshake, not the sharpness of your wit, your face. And in this world, the gold standard is a face that looks like it hasn't seen a pulse in weeks. Pale skin wasn't just attractive here. It was a badge of power. The paler you were, the more proof you had that you didn't labour under the sun like a farmhand or work a forge like a tradesman. If your skin was translucent enough to reveal the blue map of veins across your temples, you just announced without saying a word that you lived far above the reach of calluses and sweat. In a time when most people's lives were hard, dirty, and short-looking half-dead was a luxury only the wealthy could afford. And there were methods to get there. You didn't wait for nature to cooperate. You forced it. For noble women it started with avoiding daylight altogether. Curtains were drawn, hoods pulled low, parasols carried even under cloudy skies. Then came the chemistry. Vinegar mixed with crushed pearls, sometimes even white lead, smeared across the skin to bleach away the faintest hint of healthy colour. The vinegar stung, the lead burned, and after enough applications the skin itself began to change. Thinner, more fragile, ghostly. That was the goal. It wasn't enough to be pale. You had to be visibly pale. Artists of the time painted high-born women with faces so bloodless you could almost trace the arteries beneath the surface. This wasn't a romantic exaggeration, it was the ideal. If you had visible blue veins on your forehead, it meant your skin was so fine, so delicate, that the life inside you could be glimpsed without touching you. That was considered exquisite. And of course, when art set the standard, reality had to catch up. Bloodletting became a beauty ritual. A small cut to release just enough blood to weaken you to drain the warmth from your cheeks. Sometimes this was done under the guise of medical balance, but no one was fooled. It was fashion disguised as healthcare. Imagine deliberately trading away your energy, your strength, your sharpness, just so your reflection whispered aristocrat. The irony is almost comical. The very men who ruled kingdoms valued health, vitality and cunning in themselves. The women of their class were expected to appear as though they'd never once broken a sweat. It was the ultimate passive branding. Your face was the luxury car parked in front of your social status, and God help you if it had a scratch. And there were casualties. The lead in those whitening creams didn't just fade freckles, it seeped into the bloodstream, attacking the nervous system. Hands trembled, thoughts blurred, and yet the pale mask was reapplied the next morning because the alternative-looking common was unthinkable. For some, the slow poison was worth it. A social debut could be won or lost on complexion alone. The entrepreneurial part of your brain might be doing the math. High demand, limited supply, dangerous process, it's a perfect market for someone willing to take risks. And that's exactly what happened. Apothecaries sold skin-whitening mixtures like luxury watches, packaged in carved boxes scented with imported oils marketed as essential for any woman aspiring to refinement. Some families spent the equivalent of a year's wages on these concoctions, while the sellers quietly counted their profits and their customers' funerals. But here's the thing that sticks with you. When you picture a noble woman from that era, she's not healthy. She's not glowing from the vitality of a good life. She looks untouchable, as if she's already halfway to marble, and that was intentional. The message wasn't him alive and thriving. It was him rare fragile above you, a living statue. The skin was the canvas for an entire social performance. There's a strange parallel here even now. Swap the lead paste for Photoshop, the candlelit mirror for a ring light, and the marketing hasn't changed much. You're still selling an image of perfection that doesn't survive close inspection. You're still creating a signal to the world: I have resources, I have control over my appearance, I can afford to be impractical. In the medieval game of influence, pale skin was a silent weapon. It told potential allies, suitors and rivals that you belonged to the ruling class. It told everyone else to keep their distance. It also told the truth, if you knew how to read it, that the person behind it might be weaker, sicker, and more vulnerable than they appeared. But by the time anyone got close enough to see that the deal, whether it was a marriage contract, political alliance, or simply the preservation of rank, was already done. Standing in that cold chamber, the candlelight trembling on the wall, you'd smooth the last layer of cream across your cheeks, ignoring the faint metallic taste in your mouth from the lead. You'd tilt your head toward the mirror and search for that perfect, almost inhuman shade. The shade that said without a single word that you were untouchable. Not because you were strong, but because you'd made yourself a little less alive. You can taste it before you see it, the sharp, dry bite of lemon on your tongue. It's not the refreshing wedge you drop into iced tea on a summer afternoon. This is a weapon, not a garnish. The juice burns your lips, makes your mouth pull tight, and leaves behind that faint bitter film that only citrus can. In this world, it's not about flavour. It's about subtraction, pulling something out of your face that nature put there for survival. Hollow cheeks were the goal. Not the lean definition you might get from a morning run, but the kind of concave geometry that made you look ethereal, untouchable, and just a little malnourished. In the Middle Ages, a full rounded face was suspicious. It suggested you were well fed, maybe indulgent, maybe even, God forbid, happy. But hollowed cheeks told the right kind of story: you were disciplined, refined, and just fragile enough to be interesting. The fastest way to get there wasn't sculpting with makeup that was centuries away. It was starvation. Not the kind you stumble into when times are hard, but the curated, purposeful denial of food. Meals became theatre. You'd arrive at the table in a gown that pinched at the ribs, sit before a platter of roasted meat and fresh bread, and touch none of it. Maybe a sip of watered wine, maybe a single bite of bread broken delicately between your fingers. Then you'd lean back with the faint smile of someone far above the needs of the body. Lemons played their part in this performance. The acid was believed to dry the flesh, to tighten the skin over bone. Women would rub lemon juice along their cheeks or suck on slices in private before appearing in public. The puckering effect wasn't just physical, it created that faint shadow in the hollows of the face that painters love to exaggerate. In a portrait, you looked like you'd been carved from fine ivory. In reality, you might have been lightheaded from the lack of breakfast. The irony. These same households had access to more food than most of the country could dream of. Kitchens bustled with servants roasting game, baking pies, turning spits over open fires. The air smelled of spices from half a world away. But the lady of the house, she was too refined for such things. Eating in public was almost vulgar. True beauty came from restraint so visible that it could be read in the shadows of your own face. This was status pure and simple. Anyone could eat until they were satisfied. Only the wealthy could afford not to. And make no mistake, it was expensive to look this fragile. Starving yourself when food was scarce just made you another hungry person. Starving yourself when your table was full, that was a luxury. It told your peers that you had control not only over your household and your finances, but over your very flesh. Of course, there were side effects. Women fainted often. A sudden sway during a dance, a soft collapse during mass, the kind of scene that made men rush forward with a mix of concern and admiration. Nobody called it low blood sugar. They called it elegance. The weakness was part of the charm. In a society that prized delicate, untouchable femininity, even your stamina was something to be trimmed down. And this wasn't a private eccentricity. There were unspoken competitions among noble women, who could eat the least and still keep up appearances, Who could endure the longest fast without looking gaunt in the wrong way? Because there was a line and crossing it meant ruin. Too hollow, too skeletal, and you weren't a romantic ideal anymore. You were sick. And sickness wasn't beautiful unless you could pass it off as intentional. The church even gave it moral weight. Fasting wasn't just good for your figure, it was good for your soul. Denying the flesh meant you were closer to God. Saints were painted thin, their faces serene and faintly shadowed, as if hunger had cleared a space inside them for holiness to live. Some noble women leaned hard into this overlap of beauty and piety, treating the dinner table like an altar where they could make small daily sacrifices to the twin gods of status and salvation. And yet, when you strip away the layers of religious framing and social code, you're left with a strange, almost comical truth. Much of this was theatre for other women. Men noticed, sure, but the fiercest judgments and the highest praise came from female peers. They knew exactly what it cost to keep those cheekbones sharp, to keep that slight edge of shadow under the eyes. A single indulgence, a second helping of bread, a slice of cheese too large, and whispers would start. Was she losing discipline? Was her husband losing control of her? Imagine the pressure. Your appetite becomes a public matter, your body an ongoing project with no room for error. The lemon slice you hold between your fingers is just so it's a reminder. A tool, a ritual. Each bite says, I am not like the others. I can refuse what they can't. The modern mind can't help but see the absurdity and the parallels. Swap the lemon slice for a green juice cleanse or a boutique intermittent fasting program, and the logic hasn't moved an inch. Control your intake signal, your refinement prove you can do without. Even now, the language around these choices is dressed up. Discipline, longevity, wellness. In the Middle Ages, it was grace, piety, and beauty. Different words, same game. Back in that stone hall, the table is set, the servants hover, and you take your seat under the eyes of your peers. The food is rich, fragrant, steaming. Your stomach tightens, but your face doesn't show it. You lift your goblet, take a slow sip, and let the lemon's acid cut through the wine. Your cheeks pull in just slightly. In the polished metal of the serving tray you catch your own reflection, a face sharpened, refined, and just a little less alive than yesterday. Perfect. It starts with the sound, a soft deliberate pluck followed by a faint hiss of breath. Over and over in a slow rhythm like someone winding a clock. You're sitting in a wooden chair near the hearth, the only warmth in a room of stone and shadow. In your hand, a pair of iron tweezers, their tips polished smooth from use. The firelight catches the glint of metal each time you lean forward to find another hair along your hairline. This isn't grooming as you know it. This is construction work. You're not neatening stray strands, you're moving the border. One hair at a time, you're pushing your hairline farther back across your skull, clearing the canvas until your forehead seems to stretch toward the top of your head. Not because of hair loss, but by choice. In this world, a high, unbroken forehead isn't a flaw. It's a crown. It's not a small change either. By the time you're done, your brow might start halfway to where your part used to be. To modern eyes, it's jarring. To the medieval court, it's magnificent. A forehead this high was a mark of intelligence, nobility, even spiritual purity. It echoed the faces in church frescoes and illuminated manuscripts, smooth-browed saints, and a Virgin Mary, whose features were calm, distant, and impossible to read. The church's influence ran deep. If holy women were painted with high, unlined foreheads, then every aspiring noblewoman wanted to mirror that divine geometry. The message was clear. The higher your brow, the closer you were to God, or at least to the people who claimed to speak for him. But paintings could cheat. Real life required work. After the tweezers came other tricks. Some women rubbed walnut oil into the scalp to loosen hair at the roots. Others wrapped the front of their heads in vinegar-soaked bandages overnight, letting the acid weaken the follicles. A few went so far as to shave the top of the head entirely, just to get that extra inch of bare skin. And like any process worth suffering for, it wasn't done once. It was maintained weekly for years. The pain was one thing, the slow sting of hair ripped from skin, but the risk was another. Infection was a constant possibility, especially when tools were shared or cleaned poorly. The skin at the hairline could become raw red, even scarred, but that didn't matter. In a world where beauty was a form of currency, a little blood was a small price to pay for an investment in your social value. And the payoff wasn't just aesthetic. The high forehead was a status signal that travelled silently across a room. At a feast or in a courtly gathering, It separated the elite from the rest as clearly as jewels or silks. Even among the wealthy, a perfectly shaped brow could give you an edge, subtle calculated advantage in a world where alliances were sealed with glances before they were sealed with ink. Men noticed. Artists exaggerated it. And women policed each other with the quiet cruelty of people who have survived the same ordeal. Let your hairline creep forward even a little, and it was assumed you'd grown lazy or careless. A widow with a lower brow might be pitied for her decline. A young woman with one might be dismissed before she even had a chance to speak. One story that still circulates in dusty histories tells of Isabeau of Bavaria, a queen who took the trend so far she permanently damaged the follicles across the top of her scalp. Unable to grow hair in the right places, she resorted to elaborate headpiece. Hennins tilted back to show off what she still had heavy jeweled bands that pressed against the skin until her neck ached. Her solution became a fashion in itself, copied by others who didn't realize it had started as a cover-up. These headdresses were part of the performance. A tall pointed hennin worn slightly back framed the brow like a display case. Veils were pinned so they fell behind the head instead of across the forehead. Even wimples, usually symbols of modesty, were adjusted to highlight the expanse of pale skin above the eyes. If you could see a vein beneath the surface, all the better. It meant your skin was thin, delicate, and of course noble. And yes, portraits lied. Just as we edit photos today, medieval painters stretched foreheads upward, smoothed out any irregularities, and made the brow line a perfect arc. The women painted this way weren't necessarily as high-browed in life as they appeared on the panel, but the standard they set was enough to make others try. In a world without modern advertising, these paintings were billboards quietly instructing women on what they should be, and shaming those who fell short. There's something almost absurd in the commitment. Think of it as an early form of personal branding taken to the bone. You weren't just changing your look, you were reshaping your identity. Every strand plucked away was a declaration of belonging to a world above labour and beyond ordinary rules. But imagine the upkeep. It's a cold morning, and the embers in the hearth are barely holding. You sit by the light, pulling hair after hair, feeling your skin swell and your eyes water. You can't stop because the moment you do, the illusion begins to collapse. And unlike a gown or a jewel, a high forehead isn't something you can take off and put away. It's on you always. The modern mind might look at this and shake its head, but then again we still do versions of it, plucking, shaving, waxing, bleaching, changing our bodies to fit an image we didn't invent but still uphold. In medieval Europe, that image just happened to be a brow so vast it could have hosted a small picnic. By the time the tweezers are set down, the skin at your hairline is pink and tender. You run a finger over the smooth expanse, checking for stray stubble. Satisfied, you dab a bit of powder to mask the redness and pull on a headpiece that frames your work like a painting. In the mirror's dim reflection, you see not just your face but the mark of your ranker forehead, broad enough to carry the weight of other people's expectations. And in this world, that's not just beauty, that's survival. If you'd like, I can move directly into P4, erasing the eyebrows next, so the flow of the story stays uninterrupted when you record. Want me to keep going? The blade is small, the light poor, and the skin under your brows is thin enough to tear. You sit close to the fire, the heat licking one side of your face while the other is caught in shadow. In your hand is a tool so simple it's almost primitive iron tweezers, or sometimes just a sharpened blade shaped for one purpose, to strip your forehead of anything that might interrupt its smooth, empty expanse. One hair at a time you pull, not just the heavy dark ones, but every fine thread that dares to catch the light. The goal isn't neatness, it's obliteration. By the time you're done, there will be no brows at all. The skin above your eyes will blend seamlessly into your forehead, giving your face a calm, almost sculpted quality. To us, a face without eyebrows looks strange, even alien. But in the courts of medieval Europe, this was elegance refined to its purest form. Eyebrows were considered distractions, messy interruptions to the clean lines of the face. They were emotional clutter. A raised brow could betray curiosity. A furrowed one might reveal doubt, irritation, or thought. In a world where beauty meant control, such slips were unacceptable. The highest ideal was a face that revealed nothing, a serene mask. Like the marble statues of saints that lined the cathedral walls, you were supposed to look untouched by human volatility. Smooth, blank, eternal. There was a religious underpinning to it, of course. The Virgin Mary in church paintings never scowled, never smirked, never arched a brow in suspicion. Her features were soft and unbroken, her gaze fixed somewhere above the troubles of the world. To imitate her was not just fashionable, it was pious. And so women plucked, shaved and scraped until their foreheads were uninterrupted plains of skin. The tools were brutal in their simplicity. Iron tweezers pinched and tore. Small knives shaved the brow ridge clean, leaving behind faint scrapes. Some women used ash or lime to burn the hair out at the root. If that caused redness or swelling, powder was applied to disguise the irritation. The pain was sharp but brief. The look was worth it. And here's where it gets unsettling. Without eyebrows, the human face loses much of its ability to telegraph emotion. The subtle tilt of surprise, the narrowing of suspicion, the soft lift of sympathy, all muted. Your expression becomes harder to read. In a way, it's a shield. No one can tell what you're thinking, but it's also a surrender. You no longer control your own facial signals. You've erased them entirely. In court, this worked to your advantage, at least on the surface. A serene face was assumed to be a disciplined one. If you never appeared angry, never flustered, never too pleased, you were above petty concerns. Your beauty was constant, immune to the shifting winds of mood or conversation. This wasn't just cosmera, it was political. In a room where alliances could crumble over a careless glance, controlling your expression could mean controlling your fate. But it came at a cost. Those same blank faces blurred into one another. The individuality drained away. The noble hall became a gallery of living statues, women in heavy gowns and jeweled veils, their faces pale, smooth, and eerily alike. It was the aesthetic of absence. The less human you looked, the more perfect you were considered. It's hard not to see the paradox. Power in this context meant erasing the very features that made you unique. Influence was tied to conformity, and conformity was measured in millimeters of bare skin above the eyes. It was the original brand uniform, different bodies, same mask. Of course, not everyone played the game. In rural areas, far from the watchful eyes of court women, kept their brows. They had work to do, and plucking every stray hair was an indulgence they couldn't afford. But among the elite, the absence of eyebrows was so standard that paintings without them looked incomplete. Artists rendered the brow ridge as a pale, unbroken slope, shading only to suggest bone beneath skin. Men too dabbled. Some plucked or shaped their brows into thin arched lines, but it never reached the level of total removal. Male faces were allowed to remain expressive, perhaps, because their role was to speak command and negotiate openly. Women's beauty, by contrast, was about silence, both in voice and in face. There's a certain cruelty in imagining the process. You're sitting there, fire popping in the hearth, the air scented faintly of beeswax and smoke. A maid stands beside you, leaning in with a candle for better light. You close your eyes as she presses the tweezers to your skin. A quick pull, a sting, a tear you're not allowed to wipe away. Over and over until the skin is bare and tender. Then she dusts it with powder, steps back and pronounces you ready for the day. And so you step into the hall with your face perfected into stillness. People see you and think of saints and queens. They don't see the raw skin beneath the powder, the way the cold air stings against it, or the hours it will take before the redness fades. They see only the ideal, a woman so composed she appears carved from stone. The modern parallel is hard to miss. We still edit our faces to project control. Digital filters blur the lines that tell the truth, wrinkles, pores, shadows. The tools have changed, but the impulse hasn't. We still equate beauty with the erasure of humanity's little imperfections, and in doing so, we sometimes erase the humanity itself. Back then, the cost was literal skin. Today, it's more often time, money, and the quiet surrender of authenticity. But the psychology is the same. If you can smooth away the signs of emotion, you can project strength. The danger is that in doing so, you may convince others and yourself that you no longer feel. In that medieval chamber, though there's no such inner conflict, this is simply what must be done. You return the tweezers to their place, pull your veil forward to frame the new flawless expanse of your face, and glance once at the mirror. The woman who looks back at you has no trace of surprise, no shadow of doubt. Just calm, perfect stillness. And in this world, that stillness isn't emptiness, it's victory. You learn quickly in this world that a smile can be dangerous. Not because of what it says, but because of what it shows. The rule is simple: keep your lips together. Always. If someone sees your teeth, you've already made a mistake. In the medieval court, the perfect mouth wasn't wide or bright or ready to laugh. It was small, discreet, and most importantly, rarely opened far enough to reveal what was inside. And what was inside, if you wanted to meet the ideal, where teeth no larger than grape seeds. The logic sounds absurd to modern ears, but in this time the size of your teeth was a moral matter. Small, delicate teeth were signs of refinement and self-control. They suggested you ate sparingly, spoke modestly, and knew when to keep quiet. Large teeth, on the other hand, were suspect. They hinted at appetite, both for food and for other indulgences the church didn't care to name out loud. You can trace the roots of this standard in poetry from the era. Courtly love versus praise, women whose teeth would not break the skin of a grape, as if fragility were the ultimate compliment. A man could boast of his lady's beauty without ever mentioning colour or alignment. Size alone was enough. In these lines, teeth weren't for chewing, they were for admiring like pearls set in a box you never open. Of course, real life was messier. Most people, even among the elite, didn't have perfect teeth. Diets were rough on enamel, dental care was primitive, and infection was always a risk. But appearances were everything. Women used whatever tools they had to create the illusion of smallness. They filed teeth slightly despite the pain. They avoided chewing in public, taking tiny ornamental bites. Some even pressed their lips forward subtly when they spoke, as if the effort of forming words were more about concealment than communication. Hygiene was another layer of the performance. While commoners might ignore their teeth entirely, noble households kept little collections of tools and concoctions. Twigs of sage or mint were chewed to freshen breath. Pastes made of crushed eggshells, vinegar or ground charcoal were rubbed across the enamel to whiten it, though the abrasives often did more harm than good. In Italy, women chewed fennel seeds, both for the taste and the idea that it tightened the mouth. Breath mattered too. A whiff of garlic or fish at the wrong moment could undo the impression you'd built with your demure smile. Rosewater rinses and clove infusions became standard among the fashionable. These didn't treat the root causes of bad breath, but they masked them long enough to get through a conversation without scandal. The connection between mouth and morality was so strong that even laughter had rules. A small close-mouthed chuckle was acceptable in the right company. A full open laugh, especially one that showed the upper teeth, could mark you as vulgar. Women who laughed too freely were accused of immodesty, even impropriety. A restrained smile was safer an ornament you could control. There's an obvious irony here. Men in power could laugh loudly, eat heartily, and show their teeth without consequence. For women, the same act could chip away at their reputation. Control over the mouth became part of the larger control over the body, the voice, and the self. Imagine the scene, a feast in a candlelit hall, music playing softly in the background. You're seated among peers, the table crowded with roasted meats, sweet pastries, and pitchers of wine. A joke ripples down the table, drawing a burst of laughter from the men. You smile politely, lips closed, eyes lowered. The laughter dies down, but you've passed the test. No one saw more than they should. The idea that small teeth meant virtue lasted for centuries, reinforced by art. In portraits, the mouth is often little more than a pale line, the lips closed tight over whatever reality lay beneath. The teeth themselves are invisible, preserved in mystery. Painters didn't care if the subject's real mouth matched the ideal, they simply painted it that way, cementing the standard for everyone who saw it. It's not hard to see the humour in it now. The same culture that demanded visible veins on your forehead and cheeks, hollowed by hunger, also insisted you keep the rest of your face locked away. You were supposed to look like an ornament, precise, polished, and completely impractical. And yet there's a strange consistency to the logic. Just as a high forehead suggested elevated thought, small teeth suggested restraint. The less your mouth could do, the more trustworthy you were considered. A woman who couldn't easily bite into an apple surely wouldn't bite into temptation. There were of course exceptions, those who broke the rule on purpose. A too broad smile, a flash of large strong teeth could be a subtle form of rebellion. It was a way of signalling vitality, appetite, and disregard for the delicate performance everyone else was staging. But rebellion carried risks, and for most women those risks outweighed the thrill. Back in the chamber where you dress for court, you run a fingertip over your lips, checking for any hint of dryness. You chew a fennel seed, breathe in the sweet spice, and glance at your reflection in the polished metal mirror. Your lips are closed, your face composed. Whatever imperfections lie behind them are hidden, and that's the point. Later, when you step into the hall, you're greeted by nods and small approving smiles from other women. No one comments on your teeth. No one needs to. In this world, what isn't seen speaks louder than what is. You've already learned the rule of the smile, lips closed, teeth hidden. But here the law didn't stop at the smile. It reached straight into speech itself. Because in this world, the mouth didn't just hold teeth, it held thoughts, intentions, and the most dangerous thing of all, a woman's voice. Picture a dim morning in the great hall. Smoke drifts lazily from the hearth, carrying the smell of damp wool and sheep tallow. You sit on a long bench back straight in the way habit has sewn into your bones, hands resting lightly on your lap. In front of you, a row of men discusses land taxes and harvests. A question sparks in your mind, small reasonable, but your throat tightens on instinct. Not because you can't speak, but because you've been taught since girlhood closed-mouth silence is golden. The rule starts with very concrete situations. Example 1. At the evening feast, not showing your teeth when you smile is considered polite. Speaking out of turn is a moral failing. A distant aunt once told you a lady listens more than she speaks. No one ever defined exactly how much more that meant. But you learned the safe limit nod, smile, murmur. Don't ask questions. Don't tell stories. Don't make yourself the center of attention. Their phrase for a woman daring to have a story of her own. Example 2. In the embroidery rooms, supposedly the women's space rules still apply. Speak softly. Speak smoothly. Speak only what's been permitted. An honest opinion about a fabric colour or stitch can be branded as willful, and willful through some alchemy of social judgment becomes improper. From there to immoral is just one weary sigh away. Example 3 Church. Every Sunday you stand in the haze of incense listening to sermons about humility. The priest warns of the loose tongue always in the feminine form. He quotes scripture about quiet women being a blessing, about the danger of gossip. What he never says aloud, but what everyone understands, is that a woman who speaks too much is a woman who cannot be controlled. And so the lesson is clear: close your mouth and you keep your reputation. Open it and you invite judgment. Laughter could be taken as flirtation. A bold statement could be twisted into scandal. Even an innocent joke could ripple through the household until it returned to you sharpened into accusation. It is, of course, a perfect system for those in power. Control the mouth and you control the story. Control the story and you control the person. Generation after generation, mothers teach daughters how to breathe words only when safe to measure each sentence like gold dust are precious and never squandered. Outside in the noisy taverns, women laugh freely, sing loudly, trade jokes over mugs of ale. But those women aren't in portraits. They aren't in the court records. They aren't the ideal. The ideal is silent. The ideal is still. The ideal leaves no trace of her thoughts behind her lips. And that is the most suffocating part, not the rule itself, but how easily it weaves into your bones until you can't tell whether you're quiet because you want to be, or because the world taught you that you should. You've already learned that a closed mouth could mean virtue. But in this world, a hollow stomach could mean holiness. It began with saints women whose names still echo in painted glass and carved stone. St. Catherine of Siena was the most famous. She refused food so fiercely that her body withered, yet she claimed she was nourished by God alone. She was not the only one. Records whisper of other women pale as candle smoke who took fasting to the edge of death, not as punishment, but as devotion. In a time when illness was everywhere, starvation looked too much like sickness to be safe. But to those who believed the two were not the same, sickness was weakness, fasting was strength. The saints' bodies became proof of their spiritual power. Every sharp angle, every jutting bone was a sermon in flesh: I am not of this world. The mirrored imitation. It didn't take long for the idea to drift out of convent walls and into noble halls. Young ladies, seeing the reverence given to holy women, began to copy the signs. The goal wasn't sainthood, it was the appearance of sainthood. A faintness in the morning could be spun into proof of delicate spirituality. A dress hanging loose at the waist could suggest that one's soul, not one's appetite, was being fed. And when one woman adopted the look, others followed. Thinness became not just fashionable, but morally aspirational. The more your collarbone caught the light, the closer it seemed you were to heaven. A dangerous equation. In the noble imagination, thinness became a symbol with two faces. On one side, purity, discipline, divine favour. On the other, vanity disguised as piety. This was the dangerous part. A girl who truly fasted for God's sake might be honoured, even pitied. But a girl who only wanted to be admired for her saintly look risked whispers, accusations, even ridicule. The line between devotion and display was razor-thin like the women themselves, saints in the dining hall. Picture a grand feast. Platters of roasted fowl, bowls of honeyed almonds, steaming trenchers of bread. Servants pour wine as musicians play in the gallery above. At the high table, a young noblewoman lifts her cup, sips only water, and pushes the roast toward her neighbour. Everyone notices. Some see her as pious. Others suspect she's playing the part. Either way, she has achieved what she wanted to be seen. Her untouched plate becomes a kind of relic, her restraint a silent proclamation that she is more than mere flesh. The body as relic. This was the real power of holy anorexia. It turned the body into an object of reverence. The gaunt face framed by a linen wimple, the hands thin enough to show every tendon. These were read as signs of a soul consumed by higher purpose. It didn't matter that the church sometimes condemned excessive fasting, warning that it could be pride in disguise. The image was stronger than the caution. In portraits, saints and noblewomen alike shared the same fragile frame, their bodies half disappearing under heavy robes as if they were already halfway to heaven. When reverence turns to fear, the unsettling truth is that admiration often coexisted with dread. To see someone waste away was to be reminded of mortality, to sense that they were crossing into a place the living could not follow. Some women died young, their devotion measured in ribs and hollow cheeks. Chroniclers wrote of their deaths as holy passings, even when the cause was hunger. To modernize, these are tragedies. To theirs, they were proofs of a life well offered, the inheritance of the ideal generations. Later, the notion persisted a slim body could mean a clean soul. Even when the overt religious framing faded, the association lingered. Thinness still whispered of self-control, refinement, moral worth. The saint's shadow stretched long, shaping beauty standards long after their bones had turned to dust. Back to the room, you're in dim the lights, and imagine sitting in that candlelit chamber, your stomach hollow, your lips dry. Every pang feels like a prayer. Every skipped bite feels like a step away from sin and toward the divine. Somewhere outside, the feast continues, laughter music, the smell of roasting meat drifting in. But you turn away. You believe, or you want to be seen, as if you believe that the emptiness inside you is not hunger, but holiness. In the candlelit stillness of a chapel, she stares down at you from the wall, the Virgin Mary. Her skin is milk pale, her forehead high and smooth, her eyes cast downward in eternal modesty. There's no hint of strain or fatigue in her face, though she's painted holding an infant. Her hair is hidden beneath a perfect fold of fabric. Her lips are closed. Her expression is soft, pure, untouchable. This is the blueprint. In the medieval world, the most admired woman wasn't just beautiful, she looked as though she had never been touched by life at all. Not by desire, not by hardship, not even by weather. Virginity here was not simply a fact of the body, it was an aesthetic, a whole visual language built to communicate innocence so complete it bordered on the supernatural. The paradox, of course, was that many of the women expected to project this image were already wives, some already mothers. Yet they were still judged in art and in life by how well they could maintain the appearance of untouched purity. A married woman with a child in her arms was still expected to carry herself like the Virgin in the painting, Irene chaste above all suspicion. There were rules for how to achieve the look. Clothing came first. Unmarried noble women wore high necklines, long sleeves, and heavy veils that covered the hair completely. Fabric choices were dictated by local sumptuary laws, silk and fine linen for the elite coarser weaves for everyone else. But the cut was always modest. Even the colour had meaning. Pale blues and whites were favoured for their association with the Virgin Mary, signalling purity to anyone who looked your way. Hair was treated as dangerous, too intimate, too suggestive, so it was kept covered or tightly bound. In some cities, ordinances required unmarried women to veil in public at all times. In others, young women were forbidden from wearing certain kinds of jewellery or embroidery, lest they appear too forward. There was a fine line between looking like a potential bride and looking like a temptation. The body itself was shaped to fit the image. Cosmetics, when used, were subtle, no bright lips, no obvious rouge. The skin was kept pale, even bloodless, to suggest a life lived indoors, away from toil and temptation. Expressions were carefully controlled. Too much animation could betray curiosity or passion, and passion was dangerous. The ideal gaze was soft and slightly unfocused, as if your attention were fixed on something higher and holier than the world around you. Virginity as an aesthetic was reinforced everywhere in sermons, in poetry, in the illuminated manuscripts turned over by candlelight. Stories of saints and holy maidens were told and retold their beauty, described in terms that erased any trace of earthly experience. A virtuous woman's eyes knew not longing, her hands were unsullied by labour, her voice was as quiet as prayer. It was a perfection no one could actually live, but that was the point. The farther the ideal drifted from reality, the more power it had. And power was very much the issue. A woman who looked pure could secure a better marriage, protect her family's reputation, and navigate the treacherous politics of court. A single misstepper gown, cut too low, a laugh held too long with the wrong man could spark rumours that destroyed all of that. In this sense, the virginity aesthetic wasn't just personal, it was political currency. The absurdity of the ideal wasn't lost on people even then. Everyone knew that not every young bride walked to the altar in the state she was supposed to. Stories circulated of midwives employed to restore virginity with herbs or minor surgery. Reputation was everything, and appearances could be more important than truth. In some cases, the elaborate performance of innocence was as much a survival skill as it was a moral standard. Still, the hypocrisy was glaring. The same society that demanded women embody untouched virtue also expected them to bear children quickly and without complaint. You were to move seamlessly from virgin to mother without ever appearing to pass through the human stage in between. In art, this contradiction was embodied in the Virgin Mary herself, both eternally pure and visibly maternal. It was a paradox no one questioned out loud. The pressure didn't end with marriage. A widowed noblewoman, especially a young one, was expected to return to the visual language of virginity, dressing and carrying herself as if she had stepped out of the convent rather than the marital bed. To look available was dangerous, to look pure was protective. The performance could last a lifetime. Imagine the daily effort. Dressing in layers of modest fabric, arranging your veil so not a strand of hair escaped, keeping your voice low, your eyes soft, your steps measured. It wasn't just about looking good, it was about looking harmless. The less the world could imagine you as a creature of appetite, the safer you were from its judgment. And yet, for all its coldness, the virginity aesthetic had its uses. Some women wielded it strategically, cultivating an air of untouchable virtue to gain influence without inviting scandal. In the right hands, the performance became armor-heavy, constraining, but effective. If you could convince the world you were above temptation, you could move more freely in it. The modern mind can't help but see the satire built into the system. The ideal woman was both mother and maiden, active in her duties, yet untouched by life, visible, yet untouchable. It's an image designed to be unachievable, which is precisely why it lasted. The impossible standard kept women in a constant state of performance, and performance kept them manageable. Back in the chapel, the virgin's painted eyes stay fixed in their eternal downcast gaze. You pull your veil a little tighter under your chin, adjust your sleeves to cover your wrists and lower your own eyes to match hers. You may not be pure in the way the stories demand, but as long as you look like you're the difference hardly matters. In this world, appearance isn't just part of virtue, it is virtue. And nothing says virtue like looking as though the world has never laid a hand on you. The first thing you notice is the smell. Sharp, acrid, almost metallic. It clings to the air like smoke after a fire, and it's coming from your own head. You sit near an open window, not for the view, but because the breeze is the only thing keeping your eyes from watering. On your lap rests a bowl, its contents the colour of thin porridge, a mixture of herbs, ash vinegar, and dief. You have the means imported saffron, or powdered alum. This is your bleach. There's no gentle salon quality product here. What you're about to apply will sting, maybe burn, and if you leave it too long, it can take more than colour from your hair. But in this world, golden hair is worth the risk. Blonde is more than a fashion choice. It's a signal. In medieval Europe, golden hair carried the weight of purity and privilege. In painting, saints and angels are crowned with halos the same shade. Nobility claimed it as a marker of status, a soft glowing counterpoint to the darker hair of common labourers. And for women especially, it was linked, sometimes uncomfortably, to ideals of youth, beauty and sexual allure. If you weren't born with it, you made it. The process was almost ritual. First you'd fashion what looked like a straw bonnet with the crown cut out as a sun hat of sorts. You'd pull your hair through the opening so it fanned out over your shoulders, then sit in the full glare of midday sun. The hat shaded your face to protect your skin while the hair slicked with the pungent bleach mixture baked under the heat. Hours could pass like this. The longer you stayed, the lighter your hair would become. Some women perched on balconies for entire afternoons, faces hidden beneath the straw brims, hair spread like a harvest offering to the sun. The smell of the bleach was unmistakable, vinegar's sharpness, the dusty warmth of saffron, the faint bitterness of ash. Even from the street below, you could tell who was chasing the halo. It was a dangerous pursuit. The mixtures were caustic, and prolonged exposure could leave the scalp red, blistered, even scarred. Hair weakened by the process often broke off, leaving thin patches that had to be hidden under veils or carefully arranged braids. In the worst cases, women lost enough hair that they resorted to wigs, ironically defeating the purpose of the bleach in the first place. Still, the demand persisted. Golden hair was too valuable a currency to abandon. It could catch the light in a way that made your presence felt across a hall. It could draw the eye in a crowded court, spark rumours, or inspire poetry. Entire reputations were built on it. A lady with hair like spun gold might find herself compared to queens or heroines from legend. Never mind the fact that the gold was more vinegar and sunburn than genetics. Men noticed. Artists exaggerated. In portraits, blonde hair was rendered as a radiant mass, each strand catching some impossible glimmer. The truth-dry ends, uneven streaks never made it into the final image. And just as with high foreheads and pale skin, the paintings became both inspiration and pressure. If the ideal could be painted, then surely it could be achieved even if it meant weeks of discomfort and damage. The irony is that the very process of chasing the look undermined the look itself. Too much bleaching and the hair lost its shine, becoming brittle and lifeless. But stopping meant letting the darker roots grow in a visible reminder that the halo was manufactured. Maintenance was constant. Once you started, you couldn't stop without losing the illusion. The social weight of golden hair wasn't just about beauty, it was about narrative. In the right context, it suggested innocence. In another, seduction. It could mark you as a virtuous maiden or a dangerous temptation, depending on who was telling the story. And in a world where stories carried as much power as facts, your hair colour could shape your fate. Picture the scene: a balcony overlooking a narrow street, the sun at its zenith. You sit under your cut-out straw hat, the caustic mixture drying into a crust on your hair. Below, townspeople pass, glancing up at the strange tableau: a noblewoman, quietly baking her head for beauty. The smell drifts down in waves, pungent and unmistakable. Some might envy you, others might pity you. A few might shake their heads, thinking of the cost in coin time and comfort. But when the mixture is rinsed away and your hair catches the evening light like a spun halo, the calculation feels justified. In that glow is the illusion of divinity, the suggestion that you're not merely human, but touched by something higher. The modern echo is easy to hear. Today it's peroxide and foil instead of ash and saffron, salon chairs instead of balconies, but the chase for the perfect blonde still comes with its own cost-time money, and the quiet gamble with damage. We still talk about sun-kissed hair as if light itself can be captured, and worn still assign meaning to colour far beyond its chemistry. Back then as now, the halo wasn't just about the shade, it was about what people saw when they looked at you. And if what they saw was worth the burn, the hours and the smell, then the price was paid without question. The first thing you notice isn't sight or sound, it's smell. A cloud of sweetness lingers in the air, heavy enough to taste. Not the light, clean freshness of a spring morning, but something denser, more deliberate. Roses, yes, but also the faint bite of cloves, the dryness of powdered iris root, and somewhere underneath it all the faint musk of something that isn't roses at all. In the medieval court, scent was a declaration. You could announce your presence long before you spoke, simply by the trail you left behind. And like most declarations here, it had less to do with personal preference than with power. Smell in this world was status. Bathing, at least the way we think of it, was rare. Water was as much a hazard as a help too cold in winter, often dirty in cities, and whispered about in sermons as a temptation for vanity. Instead, the body was refreshed with cloths dipped in scented water, or dusted with perfumed powders that clung to the skin and hair. A true bath might happen a few times a year. In between, you masked the human with the heavenly. The wealthy didn't just wear one scent, they wore layers. Oils infused with rosemary or lavender were rubbed into the hair and scalp. Clothes were stored with sachets of dried herbs so that every fold released a puff of fragrance when moved. Gloves were soaked in orange blossom water until the leather itself smelled sweet. A fine lady might carry a pomandera, small ornate ball filled with spices and resins dangling from her belt or tucked into her sleeve. Every gesture, every movement of her arm became a chance to send another wave of scent into the air. And there was strategy in the layering. A base of musk or civet for warmth, a middle of floral waters for charm, a top note of sharp citrus to cut through the closeness of the hall. It was part chemistry, part theatre. You weren't just covering a smell, you were telling a story. The truth beneath the story was less divine. Without regular bathing, the skin held onto more than just perfume. Sweat smoke from the hearth, the faint sourness of linen worn too long, they all mingled with the fragrance in ways the perfumer probably had intended. The result could be overwhelming. Some scents clung with a kind of persistence that suggested not refinement but resistance. The perfume fighting a battle it couldn't fully win. Still, to smell like anything other than perfume was a risk. The poor often smelled of their work fish earth tallow, and that marked them as clearly as clothing did. For the wealthy, the right fragrance was armour. It could cover the traces of illness, disguise the fact that your gown had been worn 3 nights running, or make the crowded air of a feast hall just a little more bearable, and people noticed. Compliments on fragrance were a form of social currency. A lady praised for her sweet air might gain as much as one praised for her beauty. A man who smelled of costly imported spices signalled his wealth without a word. The right scent could open doors or at least keep them from closing. Perfume was also a weapon. A sudden change in fragrance could spark gossip. Was she masking a new illness? Was there a lover's gift hidden in that new scent of sandalwood? Some women were known for a signature smell so distinct that its absence was as noticeable as its presence. But the most telling detail was the cost. Many of the most prized ingredients, ambergris, musk, frankincense, were imported over vast distances, traded at prices that made them inaccessible to anyone but the elite. To smell of these things was to carry the world on your skin, to wear the proof that your wealth reached beyond borders. There's a certain humour in the contrast. The paintings show women serene and immaculate, their gowns gleaming, their hair in perfect order. The reality was more complicated, a body that hadn't seen a full bath in weeks, wrapped in layers of fabric, kept sweet-smelling by careful application of scent over scent, until the human underneath was all but erased. It's a little like arranging flowers over a closed coffin. The beauty is real, but it hides something far less romantic. And yet, there's a skill in it. Choosing the right blend, applying it so the notes unfolded gradually. Rather than all at once, refreshing it just enough during the evening to keep it alive, these were arts in themselves. A well-scented woman could pass through a hall, leaving a wake of whispers, her perfume as much a part of her reputation as her gown or her title. The modern world isn't so far removed. We may shower daily, but we still use scent as identity, still spend small fortunes on bottles meant to make us memorable. The ingredients have changed, the technology refined, but the impulse is the same, to craft the version of ourselves we want the world to inhale. Back in the great hall, you stand near the fire, your pomander warm in your hand. Each shift of your gown sends another thread of fragrance into the air. People pass and their faces soften almost imperceptibly. No one here knows when you last took a true bath, and no one will ask. All they'll remember is the roses, the spices, and the way you seem to carry spring with you on a winter night. In this world, that's not deception, that's presentation. And presentation is everything. The jar is small, heavy in the hand, its lid sealed with wax. You break it open and catch a faint chalky scent, nothing unpleasant, just clean. Inside, the paste gleams bone white, as smooth as cream. It looks harmless. Harmless enough to spread across your face. Harmless enough to trust. This is Venetian ceruse, the most coveted cosmetic in Europe, and it will kill you. The recipe is simple, in theory lead, carbonate ground fine, and mixed with vinegar or water until it forms a smooth paste. The lead gives it that perfect opaque whiteness, the kind that hides freckles, sun damage, and the thin red lines of broken capillaries. Spread over the skin, it catches the candlelight like porcelain. No powder alone can match it. The application is almost ceremonial. You dip your fingers or a small spatula into the jar, smoothing the paste across your cheeks, your forehead, the bridge of your nose. It's cool at first, almost soothing, and it dries to a soft, powdery finish that makes every imperfection vanish. Layer it thick enough and you can erase not just flaws, but the texture of skin itself. In a hall lit by flickering torches, you will look untouchable. The problem begins almost immediately. Lead doesn't stay on the surface, it seeps in. Over days and weeks of use, it builds in the body, settling in bones, clouding the mind. The first signs are subtle: a dull headache, a dryness at the corners of the mouth, a faint metallic taste when you swallow. Then the skin beneath the cerus starts to thin and crack. This creates the cruelest part of the cycle. The more damage the lead causes, the more you need it to hide the damage. Without it, your skin shows the peeling, the redness, the sores. With it, you can keep up the illusion a little longer. So you apply more. The disguise becomes the cause, and the cause becomes the reason for the disguise. Venetian ceruse wasn't the only weapon in the beauty arsenal. Mercury-based rouges promised a healthy flush without the need for actual health. Kohl made with antimony lined the eyes in glossy black, at the cost of blurring vision over time. Each product offered instant results and long-term ruin, but the risk was buried beneath layers of silk gossip and painted portraits. Some women knew or at least suspected the danger. Physicians occasionally warned of poisonous paints that robbed the skin of its natural vitality. But beauty here wasn't about health. It was about maintaining rank, attracting alliances, and playing the part demanded by your station. A pale, perfect face could secure a marriage or preserve a reputation. No one was writing poetry about clear lungs or a strong liver. The wealthy could afford the good stuff Ceres refined until it was almost pure white perfume to mask the vinegar. The poor, if they dared imitate, used cruder mixers, chalk, flour, or even ground bones. These lacked the smoothness and staying power of lead paste, but they carried their own hazards, clogging pores and harbouring bacteria. The difference between rich and poor was one of refinement, not risk. Imagine the daily ritual. Sitting at a table near the best light, you apply the paste in thin, practiced layers, feathering the edges so the mask blends into the skin at your throat. You pat a dusting of rice powder over it to set the finish. You take a last look in the mirror and see not the fine cracks starting beneath the surface, but the flawless face you're meant to present. There's a horror in the knowledge that every compliment, every radiant or angelic is bought at the price of a little more of your health. But the compliments come all the same, and in a society where beauty can determine survival, the trade feels necessary. The modern mind might flinch at the thought of spreading lead on the skin, but the pattern is familiar. We still use products whose long-term effects we don't fully understand, still chase quick fixes that leave us dependent on the very thing causing the problem. The ingredients have changed, but the cycle hasn't. In portraits from the era, the women who used ceruse look timeless, their faces smooth as marble. What you can't see is the fatigue behind the eyes, the tremor in the hands, the slow erosion of health beneath the paint. The image survives. The person fades. Back in the chamber, the paste has dried. You run your fingers lightly over your cheek and feel the silky surface cool and even. No one who sees you tonight will know what lies beneath or how much it cost to hide it. In this world, beauty isn't just effort. It's chemical warfare waged quietly against your own body. And in that war, the victory is temporary, but the damage is permanent. At first glance, she looks fragile in a way that makes you want to lean closer. Her skin is pale, almost translucent, but not the healthy kind of pale you see after a winter indoors. This is something thinner, more delicate, edged with the faint pink flush of a low-grade fever. Her eyes glisten not with tears, but with that glassy sheen that comes from being just slightly unwell. In the court of the Middle Ages, this was not a symptom to be treated. It was a look to be cultivated. They called it beauty. Today, we'd call it sickly chic. The idea was simple. The signs of weakness, of frailty, of a body too refined for labour or vulgar activity were also the signs of status. A robust tan and clear eyes might suggest you'd been working outside, moving, sweating, living in the physical world. But if you looked as though a strong breeze might carry you off, that meant you were living somewhere higher above the dirt and the strain, in a place where your body could afford to be fragile. It was a performance, but a convincing one. Women applied a faint reddish tint around the eyes to mimic the flush of mild illness. A hint of pink on the cheeks, not the bright warmth of a healthy glow, but the uneven, almost patchy colouring of someone who'd been in bed for days. In some cases, they even drew a thin blue line just beneath the skin at the temples to suggest visible veins' delicacy made visible. The church didn't disapprove. In fact, religious art often reinforced the association between holiness and frailty. Saints were painted with narrow faces, hollowed cheeks, and faraway gazes, their bodies appearing light enough to float toward heaven. Illness, or the suggestion of it, was a mark of detachment from earthly desires. If your flesh was weak, perhaps your spirit was strong. Of course, in reality, much of this look was built on actual health risks. Starvation diets, lead-based cosmetics, and long hours in cold, damp halls could and did produce genuine illness. But when the results matched the ideal, the cause hardly mattered. In some cases, an actual ailment became a kind of social asset proof that you were too refined to survive without assistance. Men noticed, and poets romanticized it. Courtly love verses compared noble women to flowers drooping in the heat, their beauty heightened by the sense that it could vanish at any moment. She is pale as dawn, one troubadour wrote, and as fleeting. The fragility was part of the seduction. She seemed rare because she seemed temporary. It's easy to see the danger. When the markers of illness are elevated to fashion, women begin to pursue them intentionally, staying indoors to preserve pale skin, fasting to sharpen cheekbones, even avoiding too much laughter to maintain a languid air. What began as an accidental consequence of living in luxury became a deliberate choice. There's a cruel elegance to it. A sickly appearance not only marked you as elite, but made you seem untouchable. No one expected you to join in rough games, to endure long walks, to do anything that might strain your fragile frame. It was a form of social insulation. The same weakness that could kill you could also protect you from labour, from scrutiny, even from certain political obligations. But it came with its own prison walls. Once you were known for your delicate beauty, any sign of strength could be read as vulgar. If you appeared too robust, too full of life, whispers would start. Had you lost your refinement? Had you been spending time somewhere improper? Illness became part of the brand, and like any brand, it had to be maintained. The irony, of course, is that the aesthetic was often more effort than health itself. Achieving the perfect, not quite well look required as much calculation as any other courtly style. It was the same game as high foreheads or lead-painted skin, a set of signals designed to separate you from the masses, even if it meant erasing parts of yourself to do it. Picture a winter gathering in a great hall. The fire blazes, but you sit just far enough away to keep your skin cool and pale. Your hair is arranged to fall lightly across your face, softening its edges. Your cheeks carry the faintest bloom of colour, dabbed on by a maid with a careful hand. Your eyes, shadowed slightly underneath, seem deeper, more soulful in the dim light. Around you, the noise of feasting and conversation swirls, but you remain a quiet, delicate island. People glance at you not with pity, but with admiration. The modern world still flirts with this strange ideal. Fashion magazines speak of ethereal looks. Influencers post photos with softly reddened eyes, as if they've been crying in perfect light. We still romanticize fragility, though we're less willing to name it for what it is. Back then they didn't hide the connection. Weakness could be beautiful and beauty could be weakness. Back in that medieval hall, you lift your cup slowly as if even that motion cost you effort. Your lips touch the wine, your gaze drifts across the room, and for a moment you feel the full weight of the performance. The warmth in your cheeks isn't health, it's calculation. But in this world, no one can tell the difference, and no one wants to. The hall fills with the clatter of boots on stone, the low hum of male voices, the faint jingle of metal from belts and spurs. A group of men strides in their presence, almost theatrical, broad-shouldered silhouettes framed in the golden light from the high windows. Every detail has been calculated, from the gleam of polished armour to the cut of their tunics. If you think medieval men were immune to beauty standards, you'd be wrong. The pressure was different, but it was real. The body was a billboard, and in this world it had to advertise not just strength, but refinement. It began with the face. Beards came in and out of fashion, depending on region and era, but in the late medieval courts of Western Europe, a clean-shaven chin often won out. It suggested youth discipline, and perhaps most importantly, access to leisure. Shaving daily meant you had servants to heat water, hone razors, and tend to cuts. Stubble might mark you as rugged in the modern world. Here it hinted you were either careless or too poor for proper grooming. Hair was its own battlefield. Long and flowing, but never wild, it was combed, oiled, and scented. In Italy, men might bleach the ends to a lighter colour for a fashionable sun-kissed look. In France, hair was kept shorter shaped to flatter the jawline. Hats and hoods were as much a part of the ensemble as a sword. A poorly chosen one could ruin the whole effect, just as the wrong tie can undo a modern suit. Then came the clothing and language in itself. Rich fabrics like velvet, silk, and brocade weren't just decoration, they were declarations. The cut mattered as much as the cloth. A tunic that hung too loose suggested you were hiding a lack of muscle, or worse, that you couldn't afford tailoring. A tunic cut too tight risked making you look vain. The sweet spot was form-fitting enough to suggest a strong build, but not so snug as to tip into impracticality. And then there was the codpiece. It began as a purely functional patch of fabric to bridge the gap between the two legs of a hose, but by the 15th century it had taken on a life of its own. Stuffed padded, sometimes jewelled, the codpiece became a statement, peace, equal parts bravado and competition. A man's status could be read in the size decoration and audacity of the one he wore. It was armour for the ego, and like any fashion trend, it spiralled into excess until it became something of a joke. Still in its heyday, it was as essential as a knight's sword. Physical condition mattered too. A knight was expected to be strong but not bulky. The ideal was the lithe, balanced body of someone who could ride for hours, fight in armour, and still look graceful at court. Broad shoulders, a narrow waist, and long legs were the proportions most praised in poetry, and depicted in tapestries. The jousting yard and hunting field doubled as gyms, the tournaments as beauty pageants with armour. Armour itself was a form of clothing, gleaming second skin that could make or break your image. A well-polished breastplate reflected torchlight like a mirror. Engravings, gilded edges, and family crests weren't just for show. They told the story of your lineage, your victories, your worthiness to stand in the company of other lords. A dented, dull suit could be the result of bravery in battle or of negligence. The viewer decided which. Even scent played a role. Men might rub rosemary or lavender oil into their hair, wear gloves perfumed with citrus peel, or carry small sachets of herbs in their doublets. The smell of horse and leather might be romanticised in poetry, but in practice no one wanted to sit beside it at a feast. The social stakes were high. Appear at court looking anything less than your best and rivals would notice. Clothes too simple, you've fallen on hard times. Armour unpolished, you're careless or worse, cowardly. Hair dishevelled, you've been drinking too much or spending time in the wrong company. And like women, men could be trapped by their own image. A knight known for his elegance couldn't suddenly show up in plain wool without raising eyebrows. A lord famed for his youthful looks might turn to subtle tricks dyes for greying hair, careful tailoring to disguise the softening of the waist. Even the warrior with a string of victories had to maintain his look if he wanted his influence to hold. There's something faintly absurd about it. These were men who could lead charges in battle, endure weeks on campaign, and yet still spend an hour debating the set of a hat plume before a tournament. They knew that half the victory was won before the first lance was lowered. If your opponent felt overshadowed before the fight began, the rest was easier. The modern parallel isn't hard to see. Swap the codpiece for a luxury watch, the polished armour for a tailored suit, the scented gloves for cologne, and the game hadn't changed much. Status is still worn on the body, still measured in details invisible to the untrained eye, but obvious to the people who matter in your world. Picture the tournament field on a clear morning. Rows of pavilions flap in the breeze, each marked with a family crest. Men stride out in gleaming armour capes draped perfectly, every strap and buckle adjusted just so. Under the helmet the hair is combed, the jaw clean-shaven. In the stands women watch, but so do other men, measuring, comparing, calculating. The first lance shatters, the crowd roars, and even as the victor lifts his visor, grinning in triumph, part of the reaction is about the fight and part of it, just as impotantis, about how damn good he looked doing it. In this world, beauty wasn't just for women. It was a weapon for men too, and it was just as sharp. The guard at the city gate doesn't have to ask your name. He only has to look at your clothes. In a world ruled by sumptuary laws, the cut of your tunic, the colour of your sleeves, even the fur at your collar can tell him everything he needs to know. Who you are, what you're allowed to own, and more importantly, what you are not. These laws were not gentle suggestions. They were the hard lines of the medieval social order, written into statute and enforced with fines, confiscations, and sometimes public humiliation. They told you exactly what you could wear based on your class, your income, your profession, and even your marital status. Fashion here was not just about taste, it was about politics. In Florence, a woman of the merchant class might be forbidden to wear pearls no matter how much gold her husband had in the counting house. In England, under Elizabeth I, only the nobility could wear purple silk, its dye imported at staggering cost from the Mediterranean. In certain German cities, only a knight could wear spurs tipped in gold, and only a lord could line his cloak with ermine. Violate the rule, and you could be fined the equivalent of months of wages. The reasoning was dressed up as morality. Lawmakers claimed sumptuary codes preserved modesty, curbed extravagance, and prevented the blurring of social ranks. But the real purpose was simpler to keep the classes visible at a glance. If a miller's wife could dress like a countess who could tell the difference in the market square. If a tradesman could wear the same velvet as a noble, how long before he began to expect the same respect? Clothing became a kind of public passport, your license to occupy a certain place in the social order. The fabric, colour and ornamentation of your dress announced your rank before you spoke a word. To dress above your station was more than a fashion faux pas. It was a political act, a small rebellion against the hierarchy. And rebellion was punished. The punishments were not subtle. In Venice, a woman caught wearing illegal jewels might be marched through the streets bareheaded, her confiscated ornaments displayed for all to see. In London, tailors caught making forbidden garments could be fined or have the item destroyed on the spot. In some towns, offenders were forced to stand in the public square, wearing their illegal finery a walking lesson in what not to do. Even colours could be restricted. Scarlet, with its rich, labour-intensive dye, was reserved for high-ranking clergy and certain nobles. Black, which required expensive dyes to achieve a deep-lasting shade, was a mark of wealth in Spain, so much so that laws limited its use to the elite. For commoners, clothing was often legally required to be made of wool in natural undyed tones, no matter how much they might afford otherwise. The irony was that these laws rarely curbed extravagance among the wealthy. They simply forced the lower classes to be creative. A merchant might commission a cloak in the finest cut and craftsmanship, but in a legally permissible colour. A tradesman's wife might adorn her gown with intricate embroidery and thread that technically met the legal standard, yet hinted at the designs worn by her social betters. The more restrictive the law, the more ingenious the workarounds became. But the most insidious part of the system was how it turned fashion into a form of surveillance. Everyone became an enforcer watching each other for breaches of the code. Servants could report their employers, neighbours could accuse neighbours. It kept the population in check without the need for constant policing. People policed themselves, fearful of both the fine and the public shame. The church lent its weight to the rules, preaching that excessive finery was a sin of pride, one of the deadliest vices. Yet the same clergy who condemned vanity in the pulpit often dressed in fabrics finer than any noble, their robes heavy with gold thread and edged in fur. The hypocrisy was hard to miss, but few dared point it out. Imagine a bustling market day. Stalls are laden with bolts of cloth-through homespun in pale beige, bright velvets in crimson and blue. You can look, but you cannot buy what you please. Your hand reaches toward the forbidden colour and the merchant's eyes narrow. He shakes his head before you can even ask. "Not for you," he says softly, not unkindly. "It's not about whether you have the coin. It's about who you are allowed to be." The cruelty lies in the fact that these rules were designed to be seen. The law didn't care what you wore in your own home, but the moment you stepped outside, you became a walking declaration of your place in the world. And for those on the lower rungs, there was no hiding it. Some tried. Smugglers carried contraband cloth into cities hidden under sacks of grain. Tailors stitched illegal fabrics into linings where they would brush the skin but never see the sun. A hood might be sewn with a strip of expensive silk just wide enough to glimpse when the wind caught it. Illegal, yes, but worth the risk for the thrill of being mistaken, even for a heartbeat, for someone higher in rank. The modern mind can't help but bristle at it. We still have our status symbols, designer logos, exclusive clubs, gated communities, but they are unofficial, enforced by culture rather than law. Back then, the law itself told you how fine your clothes could be, how bright your colours, how rich your materials. Your wardrobe wasn't just a reflection of your life, it was part of your sentence. Back in the Great Hall, the differences are clear at a glance. The lord's sleeves drip with embroidery, their cloaks heavy with fur. Merchants wear well-cut wool in modest shades. Servants blend into the background in rough brown tunics. Everyone is in their place, the hierarchy stitched into every seam. It is beautiful in its way, the precision, the order, the clarity of it. And it is terrible. Because the sumptuary laws didn't just tell you what to wear. They told you every time you looked in the mirror exactly who you were allowed to be. It starts with a glance, not a long one, just the sort of flicker that moves from your face to the next and then the next. In a medieval market square, glances can be currency. They can also be weapons, one too many that linger in the wrong way and the whispers begin. In this world, beauty isn't just an advantage, it's a form of protection. If you are pleasant to look at, you are easier to like, harder to suspect. But if your features don't fit the ideal, if your face draws attention for the wrong reasons, the same people who would compliment your beauty might instead start to question your nature. And in a time where superstition and fear live in the same house, that suspicion can turn deadly. A crooked nose, a birthmark skin darkened by the sun, none of these are crimes. But they can be interpreted as signs that God has not blessed you, signs that you are different, perhaps dangerously so. In villages where difference is a seed, gossip is the soil, and fear is the rain, it doesn't take long for that seed to sprout into something poisonous. The church and the law did not write statutes about ugliness. They didn't have to. The stories told from pulpit and hearth made the connection without ink or parchment. Witches were never described as beautiful unless their beauty was a trick or glamour meant to lure you toward harm. The real witch, the one who lived behind the glamour, was ugly, disfigured, marked. You didn't have to prove she had powers, you only had to point to her face. And so ugly became more than an insult. It became a warning label. A woman with a twisted back or clouded eye might be avoided in the marketplace, her wares left untouched no matter their quality. A man with scars could be treated as dangerous not because of his strength, but because of the story those scars might imply. And if the wrong person decided your face looked like trouble, your life could shift overnight. The process was insidious. First came the murmurs. Someone claimed you'd been seen walking alone in the woods at night. Someone else swore they'd felt your gaze on them just before their milk soured. By the time you heard the whispers yourself, they had already begun to harden into something more dangerous belief. The next stage was confrontation. It might happen in Publix, a merchant refusing to serve you, a neighbour crossing herself as you passed, or in private, a quiet visit from someone who wanted to help you change your ways. The help might be a prayer, a charm, a suggestion that you keep indoors more often. But the message was always the same: make yourself less visible. For some, the warning was enough. They altered their appearance, covered a birthmark with a scarf, kept their eyes down, avoided speaking unless necessary. They dressed plainly, made their faces forgettable, tried to dissolve into the background. Better to be invisible than to be remembered for the wrong reasons. For others it didn't work. Once the suspicion took hold, nothing short of leaving the community or being forced from it could break it. And for the unlucky few, suspicion escalated into accusation. Witch trials are remembered for their feverish talk of spells and pacts with the devil, but many began with nothing more than an unflattering face and a convenient scapegoat. A failed harvest, a sick cow, a sudden illness in a child. If you already carried the mark of ugliness, it was easy for the frightened to connect the dots in ways that suited them. When the mob arrived, they did not see a person. They saw a story they'd been telling each other for years. The way your jaw set, the way your eyes narrowed, the unevenness of your skin, all of it fit the part. You didn't need to speak to damn yourself. You didn't even need to move. Some records from the period show the absurdity in stark detail. In 1620, a woman in Würzburg was accused of witchcraft, in part because her face was unpleasant to behold. In Scotland, a man's grim aspect was listed among the reasons for his execution. No proof of harm was required, only the reassurance that the accused looked the type. The fear ran deep because it offered a sense of control. If evil could be spotted in the shape of a nose or the cast of an eye, then perhaps it could be avoided. People clung to the idea that you could read danger in a face even though it condemned the innocent. And so, beauty became more than a blessing, it was insurance. A beautiful woman might still be accused of witchcraft, but she could more easily claim the role of victim, beguiled or cursed. An ugly woman was more likely to be named the source of the curse. The injustice was not lost on everyone. Some chroniclers noted the cruelty, the way people were punished for what they could not change. But those voices were drowned out by the louder chorus of fear, and fear is persuasive. Imagine standing in the centre of a village square, the eyes of neighbours you've known your whole life turned toward you with suspicion. The air is cold, but sweat beads at the back of your neck. You know that your only crime is being seen too often, remembered too clearly for the wrong reasons. But in this moment that knowledge offers no defence. The fear of being ugly was not vanity, it was survival. You could lose your freedom, your livelihood, even your life simply because your reflection failed to match the picture people wanted to see. In the great halls of the wealthy, the stakes were different but no less sharp. Their ugliness might not lead to a witch trial, but it could close doors just as permanently. Marriages, alliances, and invitations could vanish if your appearance didn't fit the desired mould. Here too, beauty was a shield, and without it you were exposed. The modern world is far removed from public witch trials, but echoes remain. We still speak of people looking suspicious or looking the part when no evidence exists beyond appearance. We still attach moral judgments to face trustworthy, shifty, innocent, dangerous, without stopping to ask why. Back then the stakes were life and death. And in a way the real terror wasn't being ugly. It was knowing that the definition of ugly could change overnight, and once it turned against you, there was no way to turn it back. You didn't just fear being seen, you feared being seen wrong. The tapestry covers an entire wall, a rich expanse of gold, crimson and sapphire threads. From across the hall it is flawless. You see a hunt frozen in perfect rhythm hunters, lean tall in their saddles, their tunics unwrinkled by wind, their hair streaming like silk. The ladies on the sidelines smile faintly, their faces lit with the kind of light that never actually reaches this hall. Everything is beautiful. Everything is false. Medieval art was not built to record life, it was built to improve it. A portrait, a tapestry, a fresco, they were all filters, each stitch and brushstroke a step toward a more ideal truth. The result was a beauty standard not taken from the real world, but from the perfected one hanging on the wall. Painters and weavers knew their patrons' expectations before a single line was drawn. A noblewoman's skin would be rendered several shades lighter than life allowed, her cheeks delicately blushed without the blotchiness real rouge often caused. Foreheads were smoothed hairlines, raised eyes made impossibly symmetrical. If her teeth were small and crooked, she would smile with lips just closed enough to suggest perfection. If her jaw was a little soft, it would become gently sculpted in paint, the shadow beneath her chin erased. Men were granted equal generosity. A thinning crown became a full mane of curls. Shoulders were broadened to knightly proportions. The beginnings of a belly were discreetly taken in by the painter's brush. Armour was polished to a gleam no forge could achieve, and no artist would dare include the dents from real battle. Unless, of course, the scars told a flattering story. This wasn't vanity. It was currency. Portraits were tools of negotiation, advertising one's suitability for marriage alliances, political appointments, or foreign treaties. In an age when many suitors never met before the contract was signed, the portrait was the handshake. You didn't just want to look your best, you needed to look better than anyone had a right to expect. The airbrushing techniques of the time were both deliberate and culturally understood. Light was painted in ways real. Sunlight never fell, smoothing textures and hiding flaws. Tapestry weaving softened contours, automatically turning human complexity into patterns of perfect symmetry. Frescoes in churches depicted saints and patrons in the same style, elongated faces, clear skin, ideal proportions. The people in the pews below might bear no resemblance to these figures, but over time the art became the reality everyone believed in. Once the images set, the standard life began to imitate them. Women plucked their hairlines higher to mimic painted foreheads, powdered their faces to chase the luminous skin of Madonna portraits, and tilted their heads in the exact demure angle that tapestries loved to repeat. Men stood with squared shoulders and a turned-out stance straight from battle scenes, even in moments of leisure. The art didn't reflect the people it trained them. The deception ran deep because it was shared. Everyone, patrons, artists, viewers, understood that the person in the portrait was improved, but pointing it out was both impolite and politically unwise. You praised the beauty, the dignity, the divine light in their features, and in doing so you reinforced the fiction. And the fiction had teeth. If you didn't resemble the ideal in life, you were reminded of it daily by the images surrounding you, in the chapel, the council chamber, the guild hall. Saints, nobles, and ancestors stared down from every wall, all of them perfect. If you fell short, it wasn't the art that was at fault, it was you. Consider the case of Margaret of Austria, whose portraits often show a delicate, pale, symmetrical face. In life, chroniclers noted her prominent jaw and uneven features details entirely absent from the paintings. Or Richard III, whose posthumous portraits softened his spine and straightened his posture to erase the scoliosis that in reality was one of his defining traits. These images were not lies so much as they were propaganda crafted to leave a lasting impression that reality could not compete with. For the wealthy, commissioning such work was an investment in reputation. For the poor, the standards set by these works were a trap. You could never afford the clothing, the grooming, or the artistic flattery needed to compete. And yet you were still judged against those impossible woven and painted figures. Tapestries were the most forgiving and the most deceptive. The nature of the weave erased fine detail automatically. Skin became a single shade. Hair flowed in perfect arcs. No wrinkle or scar survived the loom. The tapestry filter of the medieval world didn't just smooth flaws. It eliminated them so thoroughly that the human beneath became a symbol and archetype. And these archetypes were portable. Tapestries travelled with their owners from castle to castle, projecting wealth and idealized beauty wherever they hung. A banquet could be transformed instantly by draping the walls with scenes of perfect gardens or spotless hunting parties. Guests stepped into a curated reality surrounded by flawless faces and spotless clothing, and they played their parts accordingly. The problem was never just that the art laid it was that the lie became the truth people measured themselves against. And because art could always be improved a little more, the standard kept rising. A portrait from one decade might look realistic until the next generation's work made it seem plain. Beauty inflated the way coinage sometimes did, always requiring more to buy the same effect. We haven't escaped the game. Our tapestries are now screens, our portraits digital. The tools are faster, but the principle is the same. Smooth the skin, brighten the eyes, adjust the jawline, hide the weight. The gap between the real and the represented widens, but because everyone participates, the fiction feels normal. Back then, you could stand in front of a portrait and know it had been flattered, yet still believe it more than the living person beside you. Today, we scroll past an image we know is filtered, yet still feel the pull to measure ourselves against it. The technology changes, the psychology does not. Picture the Great Hall again. The real people in it are tired from travel, their clothes creased their hair a little, mussed from the wind outside. But on the walls, the woven hunters still ride in perfect formation, the painted ladies still gaze with eternal calm. The art never ages, never sags, never falters. The living move beneath it, aware that they will never match it, not because they are flawed, but because the perfection was designed to be unreachable. That is the cruel genius of the system. The art was not just decoration, it was a mirror you could never see yourself in, and yet you were expected to try. The first change is so small you almost miss it. A court musician plays the same melody she's played for years, but this time when she finishes, fewer heads turn to notice. You pass through the hall in a gown that once drew eyes, and the glances you catch now slide away quickly, as if they have somewhere else to be. You haven't done anything wrong. You're simply older. In the medieval world, beauty was not just admired, it was a kind of currency. And like any currency, it depreciated. A woman's value at court began to fade not when her skin wrinkled or her hair silvered, but much earlier. Sometimes by her mid-20s she was already seen as past her prime. Invisible at 25 was not a phrase they used, but it might as well have been a rule written into the architecture of the great halls. Youth was the high season. Everything afterward was the slow fade into the background. The fade-out was rarely dramatic. There was no announcement, no public declaration that you'd been moved from the centre of the dance to its edges. It happened quietly, like the dimming of a candle no one bothers to trim. Invitations became fewer. The glances across the room carried less curiosity, more polite disinterest. Conversations that once drew you in now continued just fine without you. For women, especially in noble circles, this was more than a matter of ego, it was a shift in survival strategy. Beauty had been a shield, a bargaining chip, a way to command attention in rooms where their voices were otherwise limited. When that shield thinned, the danger wasn't just being ignored, it was being dismissed. The system was brutally efficient. Younger women entered the scene each year polished and presented their faces fresh and unlined. They wore the same styles, played the same games, but with the advantage of novelty. The men in power noticed, so did the women. Every hallway encounter with the new generation was a reminder of the clock you couldn't stop. The irony was that age often brought the very qualities that should have increased a woman's influence: wisdom, political skill, social intuition. But the court wasn't built to reward those things in women unless they came packaged in youth. A 20-year-old with a charming face could win the ear of a prince faster than a 35-year-old with twice the intelligence and experience. Some women adapted. They shifted their roles from the romantic to the maternal, from the visible to the strategic. They became matchmakers, advisors, confidants, positions that required influence without the spotlight. For others, the transition was harder. Without beauty as a calling card, they found themselves pushed to the edges of the feast hall, seated further from the centre of the table, their voices drowned in the din. Art reinforced the fade-out. Portraits of noble women were often painted in their youth, their images frozen at the height of their beauty. As they aged, the living woman and her painted likeness became two different people, the one who walked the halls now, and the one still smiling from the wall eternally 20. Visitors saw the portrait and compared it to the present rarely in her favour. The art became both a memory and a quiet indictment. In the villages, the fade-out worked differently, but with the same result. Their beauty was less about silks and court dances and more about fertility, the promise of strong children. A young wife was admired, an older one was simply expected to work harder. The shift from noticed to overlooked could happen even faster in a small community where gossip moved quicker than the seasons. It wasn't only men who judged. Other women, especially those still in their season, sometimes reinforced the divide. There was safety in pointing out the flaws of someone older, in reassuring themselves that their own time in the centre had not yet passed. The cycle continued generation after generation, each group replacing the last without ever questioning the rules. The harshest truth was that the fade-out could happen even if you were still beautiful. A flawless face meant little if it was no longer new. The court's appetite was for novelty, and once it had feasted on you, it moved on. For those who resisted the fade, there were strategies, more elaborate clothing, heavier cosmetics, calculated alliances with powerful men. Some leaned into eccentricity, crafting an image so memorable that it demanded attention regardless of age. But these were exceptions. For most, the best defense was acceptance. You stepped back, gracefully ceded the spotlight, and hoped to find value in other roles before the silence around you grew too loud. The modern mind may think itself free from this cycle, but echoes remain. We still live in a world where women feel the pressure to stay young, where entire industries promise to pause the clock for the right price. Social invisibility doesn't strike at 25 anymore, but the fear of fading lingers. The language has softened the rules less rigid, but the game is still recognizable. Picture a medieval feast. The room glows with candlelight, the air thick with the scent of roasted meat and spiced wine. At the high table, the youngest faces catch the torchlight, their laughter bright and unmeasured. Further down, the women who once sat there now speak in lower tones, their expressions more guarded. They are still here, still present, but the hall looks through them rather than at them. Some accept the view from the edges with quiet dignity. Others feel the loss like a wound that never quite closes. In both cases, the shift is irreversible. The beauty that once opened doors has become a memory, and memory is not a key. The tragedy is not that age comes for everyone, it's that the society of the time made so little room for what came after. In the world of the medieval court, beauty season was short, and its end was a slow erasure. You didn't vanish overnight. You faded, and the fading was as deliberate and structured as the beauty rituals that had once kept you in the light. And when the last of the glances stopped following you across the hall, you learned the hardest truth of all in a place that only valued you for your appearance growing older wasn't just a change. It was an exit. The first thing you notice is the sound. Not of the fabric itself, it makes almost none, but of your own breathing echoing softly inside the small space left for your face. The linen is close pressed, smooth against your hair, wrapping under your chin, framing everything the world is allowed to see. You turn your head and feel the faint resistance of cloth stretched just so, the gentle but insistent tug that reminds you are contained. This is the wimple, a length of linen folded and pinned to cover the hairneck and sometimes the sides of the face entirely. At first glance it looks simple, almost modest to the point of invisibility. But there's nothing simple about what it means or how it feels. The sensation is both secure and suffocating. The fabric's edge presses lightly into your jaw, the way a collar does when it's buttoned too high. The air inside is warm, scented faintly of the soap used to wash it, and the skin it rests against. Your hair, pinned flat beneath, loses its shape almost instantly, growing damp if the day is warm, chilled if the day is cold. There's no escape for it. The wimple is not a garment you adjust throughout the day. Once it's pinned, it stays. In theory, it's practical. It protects against wind and sun, keeps dirt from the hair, and especially for married women signals respectability. But in practice, it's more than a garment. It's a frame. a literal physical frame for the only part of you strangers are permitted to see your face, or sometimes only the oval of your eyes, nose and mouth. Everything else is hidden, contained, controlled. The message is unmistakable. Your beauty, your hair, your bare skin are not yours to display. They belong to your husband, your family, and above all to God. In the medieval Christian world, the wimple carried religious weight. It echoed the veils of nuns who wore theirs as a sign of humility and separation from worldly vanity. For laywomen, it was a softer but still pointed version of the same idea. The church approved. Preachers praised covered heads as marks of virtue, citing scripture that declared a woman's hair a glory that must be veiled in public. To leave it uncovered was to invite temptation not only to men but to yourself, encouraging pride in the way your hair caught the light or the wind played with it. The wimple removed that temptation entirely. Its physical presence shaped more than your appearance. It shaped how you moved. You couldn't turn your head too quickly without pulling the pins or loosening the fabric. Eating required a careful tilt of the spoon so as not to stain the linen. Even smiling too broadly could cause the cloth at your cheeks to shift. The garment enforced stillness, composure, and a kind of deliberate grace that was as much about control as about elegance. For some women, especially in the higher ranks of society, the wimple was richly made fine linen, sometimes edged with embroidery, or paired with a veil that flowed down the back in carefully arranged folds. For others, it was plain functional, washed until the linen grew thin and soft. The material might change, but the effect was the same, a boundary between you and the world, and boundaries cut both ways. To those outside, the wimple signalled respectability, modesty, and in some contexts, wealth-fine white linen was not cheap. But it also signalled compliance. You were following the rules, marking yourself as a woman who knew her place in the order of things. It was a silent contract between you and the gaze of society. I will not challenge you by showing what is meant to be hidden. Breaking that contract carried consequences. In some towns, women who went bareheaded in public without cause could be fined or scolded in the square. In others, the shame was less formal, but no less betinger. Raised eyebrow, a whispered remark, the slow erosion of your reputation. For a married woman, that could be dangerous. For an unmarried one, it could be ruinous. And yet, within the rules, there was room for subversion. A particularly fine wimple cut just a little closer to the face could highlight cheekbones or eyes more than intended. A veil attached loosely at the top could catch the wind and draw the eye. Some women learned to arrange the folds in a way that suggested softness or elegance without technically breaking the rules. The church might have wanted uniformity, but fashion always found a way to slip in. Still, the sense of containment never quite left. You felt it when you bent to pick something up and the fabric shifted against your throat. You felt it in summer when heat gathered under the linen and sweat prickled along your hairline. You felt it when you caught your reflection in a polished metal plate and realized how small your visible self had become. In portraits and tapestries, the wimple could be romanticized, softly draped, perfectly white, framing the serene face of a lady in prayer or a queen receiving an embassy. In life, it creased, it stained, it itched. And because it hid so much, it often erased individuality. With everyone's head and neck similarly wrapped, the differences between women became smaller in the public eye and their presence more interchangeable. Men had their own visible symbols of rank-sword spurs, elaborate hats, but these signalled action, mobility, freedom. The wimple signalled stillness. To wear it was to carry the architecture of modesty on your body, a constant reminder to inhabit the space allowed to you and nothing more. Imagine walking into a crowded market. Your field of vision is narrowed slightly by the edges of linen near your cheeks. You hear the calls of merchants, the clatter of cartwheels, the bray of a donkey, but you move differently than the men around you. You can crane your neck freely to look at goods high on a shelf without loosening your pins. You don't speak as loudly, knowing that every movement of your jaw shifts the fabric. Your presence is contained not just by your will, but by your clothing. The modern mind might compare it to a hoodie pulled tight, the drawstring cinched, until the outside world becomes a small, manageable circle. But the hoodie is a choice worn or removed at will. The wimple was not optional, it was a uniform of obedience. For some women, it was a comfort. It offered privacy, a way to move through public spaces without inviting the same scrutiny as uncovered hair. For others, it was a daily reminder of what was not theirs to control. Their bodies, their beauty, their movement in the world. The wimple was more than fabric. It was policy stitched and pinned into place. By the time you unpinned it at the end of the day, the skin beneath felt almost weightless, the air cooler against your neck. You might rub the line where the cloth had pressed comb out your hair, and for a few private minutes feel like yourself again, larger, freer, unframed. And then in the morning you'd put it back on, because in this world the choice to be uncovered wasn't yours to make. At first you think it's a mistake, maybe the cobbler misread the pattern. The shoe in your hand is absurdly long, the pointed tip extending well past where your toes would end. It's not just an inch or two, but a full hand's length of empty leather, curving slightly upward as if it might take flight. The sole narrows to something more like the edge of a knife than the broad, sturdy shape you know from workman's boots. You've just met the poulain. This was the shoe of Europe's late Middle Ages, beloved by nobles and despised, quietly, but sincerely by anyone who had to walk more than a few steps in them. The exaggerated pointed toe was the fashion statement of its day, the medieval equivalent of the high heel, impractical, a little ridiculous, and a clear signal that you did not spend your time doing anything so ordinary as manual labour. The feeling of wearing them was a mix of elegance and absurdity. You couldn't stride naturally. The extended point demanded shorter, more careful steps, almost like gliding. Climbing stairs meant lifting the toe deliberately to avoid catching it, and getting into a saddle required practice to keep the extra leather from folding uncomfortably. If the weather was wet, the point could drag in the mud, darkening the fine leather, and leaving an embarrassing streak for all to see. Why would anyone choose such a thing? The answer is simple, because they could. The length of the toe became a direct indicator of social rank. In some regions, sumptuary laws even specified the maximum length of your poulain according to your class. A mere merchant might be allowed 2 inches beyond the toes. A knight could wear 6, a prince perhaps even more. The most extreme examples, sometimes stuffed with moss or horsehair, to keep their shape could extend nearly half a foot into the air. You didn't just wear poulains, you broadcasted your place in the hierarchy with every step. The origin of the style is usually traced to Poland, hence the name poulain, but by the 14th and 15th centuries it had spread through courts across Europe. Like all elite fashions, it evolved into a game of escalation. If last season's points were impressive, this season's had to be even longer, more sharply curved, more elaborately decorated. The wealthy could afford to have them made of fine, supple leather dyed rich colours, with stitching so precise it was almost invisible. Some had the points tipped in metal or embroidered with gold thread. But the design also had its critics. Church preachers railed against poulain as symbols of vanity, claiming their shape imitated the devil's hoof. Chroniclers mocked them in satirical poems describing noblemen tripping over their own shoes or getting them tangled in each other's at dances. There are even accounts of knights having to remove their poulains before battle, replacing them with shorter shoes to mount their horses quickly. The social meaning, however, outweighed the mockery. Long-pointed shoes said you didn't need to run to work or to be ready for sudden action. They suggested a life lived at a measured pace on smooth floors in rooms where the mud was someone else's problem. Just as a lady's wimple framed her face into stillness, a nobleman's poulains framed his movement into elegance. The shoe itself became a soft kind of armour knot for the body, but for status. For women of rank, poulains carried a different challenge. The long pointed tips made walking in narrow skirts even trickier, forcing a slow, deliberate step that some found graceful and others found maddening. Sitting required arranging the points neatly under the chair, or allowing them to rest at an angle the way a modern stiletto wearer might cross her legs to show the shoe without scuffing it. The humour of it is obvious. Imagine a grand feast where the high table is lined with men whose feet stretch out like a row of spears beneath the cloth. When they rise, the points all angle upward, a chorus line of absurd leather peaks. Crossing the room becomes a dance of avoidance, each noble carefully sidestepping to keep from tangling toes. And yet, the moment they sit again, the points fall into place, the ridiculousness hidden beneath the weight of the robes and the confidence of the wearer. Still, there is something touching about the commitment to such an impractical form of beauty. It's a reminder that status has always been performed often at the cost of comfort. The poulains were more than shoes. They were walking billboards for a life without urgency, the luxury of moving at exactly the pace you wanted in exactly the spaces designed for you. Of course, the poor noticed. Cobbled imitations appeared in towns shorter, and made from coarser leather, their points stiffened with whatever scraps could be found. But these knockoffs carried risk. In some cities, wearing points too long for your station could result in a fine or even confiscation of the shoes. Like a counterfeit coin, an overly ambitious poulain could expose you to trouble if you didn't have the rank to back it up. The most extreme fad burned itself out eventually. By the late 15th century, the style shifted toward broader, flatter shoes, and poulains became the stuff of caricature in plays and stories. But for nearly a century they reigned as a visible daily reminder that humble, functional feet could be turned into instruments of status. Picture a rain-slick street outside a castle. A merchant hurries past in sturdy ankle-high boots, splashing through puddles without concern. Behind him, a young nobleman steps down from a covered carriage, his poulain gleaming despite the weather. He pauses before the mud, calculating his path so the points will remain unsullied. Two worlds meet in the same space, but their shoes tell entirely different stories, and perhaps that is the bittersweet truth. In their most exaggerated form, poulains were ridiculous, even comedic, but for those who wore them, they were also a declaration I belong to a world where my steps are precious enough to protect, where even my feet must play their part in the theatre of rank. They were impractical, uncomfortable, and occasionally mocked, but in the language of medieval fashion they were eloquent. And like every status symbol, before and since they worked, the day begins before the sun, not because there's joy in rising early, but because the work of being beautiful starts long before anyone sees you. The first task is hair. It must be brushed smooth, every strand tamed, then arranged according to fashion. That might mean pinning it flat beneath a wimple, braiding it tightly to fit under a cap, or if you're aiming for the coveted high forehead, plucking the hairline back until it stings. The air is still cold and the candle sputters in its holder, but your fingers are already busy, nimble from repetition. Then comes the face. The lead-based powder is cool at first touch, almost pleasant, but the smell is faintly metallic. You pat it on carefully, avoiding the eyes, then add a faint blush high on the cheeks. The goal is not to look healthy too much. Colour suggests time outdoors, but to create that fragile, sheltered paleness the court admires. A smear of crushed berries or a dusting of cinnabar might tint the lips, though the taste lingers unpleasantly if you speak or eat. By the time the first light reaches the window, you're only halfway done. Dressing is its own ritual, layers upon layers in the proper order. Linen shift, wool kirtle, sometimes a stiffened bodice, then the outer gown. Each layer adds weight, both literal and symbolic. The gown is adjusted to fall, just so the sleeves aligned to flatter the arms. A belt might cinch the waist not for comfort, but to give the correct line to the silhouette. If you're of high rank, you don't dress alone. A maid adjusts the folds of your skirt, ensures the embroidery is visible, but not ostentatious, pins the veil so it drapes perfectly. You stand still the way a knight stands still to be armoured. The process is the same in spirit preparation for the battle of appearances. Breakfast is brief. Food is chosen for its effect as much as for its taste, something light to avoid bloating, perhaps a bit of bread or fruit. Too much meat or wine in the morning might redden the skin a flaw no amount of powder can fully hide. You sip water carefully, mindful not to smudge the paint on your lips. By mid-morning the performance is in full swing. In the hall your posture is perfect, your hands arranged just so in your lap. You speak in measured tones, never too loudly, never interrupting. When you walk the movement is deliberate short steps, skirts lifted only enough to clear the floor. Every glance is calculated, friendly, without being familiar, confident without seeming vain. It is work, constant invisible work. At midday the gown may need adjusting, especially if the weather is warm. Powder must be reapplied, hair smoothed. A stray strand can undo the mornings. Impression a smudge on the wimple can suggest carelessness. You retreat briefly to fix these things the way a scribe might sharpen a quill before continuing. Meals are another arena. Eating with grace is a skill, large bites, no dripping sauces, no gestures that could shift the veil or stain the gown. You laugh only lightly, hand covering the mouth if teeth are shown. You drink in small sips, aware that the shape of your lips against the cup may be noticed. The afternoon brings more appearances, perhaps a stroll in the garden, a visit to a neighbour, or receiving guests. Each requires the same readiness. The sun may be pleasant, but you avoid too much of it. Tanned skin whispers of fieldwork, not refinement. If the wind threatens your veil, you walk slower, angling your body to keep the cloth in place. By evening, the weight of the day is physical. The bodice pinches the wimple, presses against your jaw, the pins in your hair tug at your scalp. Your feet ache from shoes made for elegance, not comfort. You've smiled for hours without letting the expression slip, kept your shoulders back, your neck long, your hands still except when deliberately moved. Dinner is the largest social stage. Candlelight flatters the skin but also exaggerates shadows, so you sit where the light falls softly, avoiding the angles that might deepen lines or hollows. Conversation is a performance, and you measure every word mindful of tone and timing. The game is to appear effortlessly charming, even though nothing about it is effortless. After the meal there may be music or dancing. If you dance, you do so with controlled energy, enough to show grace, never enough to break a sweat. If you listen, you sit with your head inclined at the right angle, veil falling in an artful line. Even at rest you are working. It is only in the privacy of your chamber that you let the mask drop. The gown is unfastened, the veil unpinned, the hair unbraided. The powder comes away in a damp cloth, leaving the faint dryness of lead on the skin. You stretch your neck, your shoulders, your feet, rediscovering the shape of your body without the architecture of beauty built upon it. You feel the relief, but also the knowledge that tomorrow it begins again. Because in this world, beauty is not a gift you carry passively. It is a craft, a discipline, a full-time job that pays no wage but charges a constant toll. There are no weekends, no days off, no retirement. The work doesn't end until your beauty is gone, and by then the role you played has already been handed to someone else. And yet there is a pull to it. The ritual can be satisfying, even addictive. The moment you step into the hall and feel the eyes turn toward you, all the hours of preparation feel momentarily justified. You are the image you built, and the image is powerful. Still lying in bed at the end of the day, you know that the beauty they saw was not entirely yours. It belonged to the work, to the rules, to the culture that taught you to see it as worth the cost. And tomorrow you will pay it again. Alright, here's your P21 Ultra Full 2000 words. Slow and deliberate, carrying the reflective tone laced with light. Sarcasm anchored in your motif. Tinang tstmxun igian. It starts by holding the weight of all 20 parts before it, and then loosens into self-awareness and release, tying the old standards to modern ones without being preachy. You can almost hear them if you sit still long enough. Not the clatter of banquet halls or the rustle of silk skirts, not the hiss of lead powder falling into a dish, but something softer, the kind of sound that makes you turn your head without realizing. A whisper. It's faint but familiar. The voices aren't speaking in one language anymore. They don't need to. They've been repeating the same message for centuries, dressed in different words, different fashions, but always the same melody. You could be beautiful if you tried harder. Once that whisper told you to pluck your hairline back until your forehead was a white shining expanse, to press your skull into the halo painted on the chapel wall. Another time it told you to bleach your hair until your scalp burned, to tie linen so tightly under your chin that your breath came in measured doses. Now it tells you to glow, but never shine, to age gracefully, but never visibly, to love yourself, but preferably in a version smoothed by filters, slimmed by angles, lit by lamps that cost more than your rent. The language changes, the tools change, the logic doesn't. The white lead has gone. In its place is a jar of foundation promising natural coverage. The wimple has been traded for the effortless hair tuck behind one ear. Instead of wincing under the pluck of a hairline, we wax thread laser techniques, sold with smiling faces and clean fonts, but all born from the same impulse to frame, to control, to decide which parts of you may be seen and which must be hidden. And the no makeup look. It's the same joke medieval women told with their chalk and carmine paint yourself until you look like you woke up perfect. The irony hasn't aged a day. If you lived, then you might have stood in front of a polished metal mirror, powdering your face with the knowledge that the mixture was eating into your skin. Today you might tilt your phone to catch the good light, knowing the picture you're about to post bears only a passing resemblance to the face you'll wash tonight. The rhythm hasn't just survived, it's tightened. Back then you performed beauty for the people in your village, your court, maybe your city if you were especially visible. Now the stage is global, the audience endless, and the applause button is just a thumb pressing a glass screen. It's tempting to laugh at the absurdity of the old ways. We picture the Pulane's absurdly long toes sweeping the ground, the nuns scolding uncovered hair, the noble women balancing in gowns heavy enough to make sitting a chore. We call it silly, outdated, barbaric. But then the whisper asks, do you think your shoes are practical? That your clothes aren't coded with status? That your face isn't curated to tell the right story before you say, the rules aren't written in law anymore, they're written in algorithms. No guard finds you for the wrong colour. The audience simply scrolls past. No bishop scolds your hair. An influencer makes you feel like you should fix it. Medieval beauty wasn't just appearance, it was control. It told you where to belong, how to move, how much space you could take. Today it hides under choice and self-care. Bleach your teeth, sculpt your waist, smooth your skin, it's all up to you. But the whisper grows louder when you refuse. The game isn't meant to be won. Rules change to keep you chasing. Pale skin once meant wealth. Now a healthy glow means leisure. Thin brows, thick brows, and decade you're perfect, the next you're out of style. Though your face hasn't changed, there's power in seeing the pattern. The same voice that told a medieval girl to wear crushed pearls in her hair is the one telling you to contour for Zoom. It's not prophecy, it's a script. And scripts can be rewritten. You're not alone. The woman who loosened her wimple to show a lock of hair is kin to the one who leaves freckles unblurred. The man padding his codpiece shares a spark with the exec, angling his watch toward the light. The tools change, the hunger stays, so maybe it's not about winning the game but stepping out of it. Wearing the dress because it feels yours, choosing the photo that makes you laugh. The medieval woman risked ruin for defiance. You can choose your audience. You can keep those who see you in unfiltered light. The whisper can push and shame, but it can't stop you from stepping back, from taking the mask off early, from letting the light fall where it will. Let them have their trends looping like a snake eating its tail. You can listen, nod, and decide you have better things to do. You've survived every standard thrown at you, some followed, some ignored, some worn like armour, some shrugged off. The whisper will keep talking, it always has. It will dress up its demands as new as personal. But you'll hear the echo, the same gossip that told your ancestors to powder their cheeks, tighten their veils, hide their laughter. Tonight you don't have to answer. Let the whisper fade into the noise, the pulse in your chest. Close the door on their demands. Step out of the frame, out of the lens. Leave the gown in a heap, the hair loose, the face bare. When they look for you, whether with paintbrush, phone or rule booklet, then find the space empty. Let them whisper, my friends, if you're still with me, I want to thank you. Taking the time to join me on this journey, to step back into a world that often felt so alien to our own, is something I truly appreciate. We've spent nearly 2 hours breathing the thick, gris, smoky air of the Middle Ages, wincing at the thought of a rag dipped in vinegar, and perhaps, for just a moment, feeling a shared phantom itch. It's a lot to take in. It's a lot to sit with. And before we go our separate ways, I want us to take a moment to reflect on what this strange, sometimes disgusting, trip through history can teach us, because history, as I see it, isn't just a collection of dates and names. It's a mirror. It shows us where we've been, so we can better appreciate where we are. It's a lesson in gratitude, a study in resilience, and a reminder of the things that truly matter. Let's dig in, shall we, and find the humanity buried beneath all that dirt. The first and most obvious lesson from our time in the Middle Ages is a profound sense of gratitude for the simple things. We've become so accustomed to the comforts of our modern world that we often forget they are, in fact, luxuries. A hot shower, a flush toilet, a bar of soap that doesn't burn your skin, a bed that isn't teeming with mites. These aren't just conveniences. They are the fruits of centuries of innovation and struggle. Think back to the open door theory, the fear that warm water could open your pores and invite sickness. Imagine living in a world where the very act of trying to get clean was seen as a dangerous gamble. Now, think about your last shower, the steam, the soothing heat, the lather of the soap. It's not just a way to wash away the day's grime. It's an act of pure, unadulterated safety and comfort that our ancestors couldn't have imagined. Or consider the simple act of drinking a glass of water. Our medieval counterparts drank Alanot for the taste, but because the water in the wells and rivers was often a swirling cocktail of disease, they had to choose between intoxication and illness. You and I simply turn on a tap. That tap, my friends, is a miracle. It's a silent, constant testament to the work of scientists, engineers, and public health officials who have given us a world where thirst is no longer a matter of life or death. So, the next time you get a cool drink of water, take a moment to be grateful. It's a quiet tribute to every person who chose ale just to make it to the next day. This gratitude extends to our homes, our clothes, and our food. We can buy bread without chewing through stone. We can change our clothes every day, not just every season. We can sleep in a bed that is exclusively ours, without sharing it with strangers or rats. These are not minor details. They are fundamental pillars of a life of dignity and ease. By understanding what life was like without them, we can appreciate the immense privilege we have in simply existing in our own time. The second lesson is perhaps the most humbling, the incredible resilience of the human spirit. It's easy to look back at the Middle Ages and see only misery, but that's a superficial view. Beneath the filth and the fear, people still found ways to be human. They laughed, they loved, they created, and they endured. Remember the communal bathhouses before they were shut down? They were a lukewarm soup of sin. Yes, but they were also places of community. People didn't just go there to wash. They went to talk, to gossip, to eat, and to find a moment of warmth in a cold world. That desire for connection, for shared experience, is something that transcends time and dirt. They found a way to turn a chore into a social event, to find joy in a shared, steamy room, even if it was a bit unsanitary. Think about the tiny acts of vanity and hope we discussed. The girl dabbing her face with a drop of rosewater before market day. The boy with a sprig of thyme tucked into his tunic. These weren't grand gestures. They were small, private acts of rebellion against a world that wanted to wear them down. They were a way of saying, I am still a person, I still care, I still hope. And in those moments, they found a kind of strength that is truly inspiring. They knew their efforts might not make a difference in the grand scheme of things, but they did it anyway. They fought the dirt because it was a way of fighting despair. That fundamental impulse to find beauty and dignity in the face of ugliness is one of the most powerful things about us. Our deep dive into medieval life also reveals a lesson about community. We've become so focused on personal space and privacy that the idea of a shared bed or a public latrine seems horrifying. And yet, for them, it was simply life. Think about the sheer closeness of their existence. Families sleeping in a single room, sharing a bed, a meal, and a fate. It forged a kind of bond that we can hardly comprehend. They knew each other's smells, their sicknesses, their sorrows, and their small victories. This intimacy, while physically uncomfortable, created a dense social fabric. They relied on each other in a way that we rarely do today. A neighbour's cry of "guard low" wasn't just a warning, it was a part of a shared, communal rhythm. In our world, we can choose our social circles and create digital connections across continents. But in the Middle Ages, your community was your world. It was a net that caught you when you fell, and a constant presence that you couldn't escape. There's a powerful lesson in that, a reminder of the enduring human need for belonging. We may have more space and privacy, but we may also have lost a certain closeness that comes from facing hardship together. Finally, let's talk about perspective. We've used the word dirty repeatedly throughout this journey, but we must do so with the understanding that it's a modern judgment. To a person in the Middle Ages, clean wasn't a sterile, scent-free state. It was a matter of managing the chaos. Clean enough meant the smell wasn't overwhelming. It meant the rag wasn't dry. It meant you had a bar of soap, no matter how crude. They weren't ignorant. They were resourceful. They made the best of what they had, using vinegar, herbs, and ash to create a world that, while foreign to us, made perfect sense to them. They were trying, scraping, dabbing, hoping. The dirt was always winning, as we said. But the fact that they kept trying is the real story. This teaches us to be more empathetic, not just to the past, but to each other. It reminds us that our definitions of success, comfort, and cleanliness are not universal truths. They are products of our time, our technology, and our culture. By understanding the why behind their what, we can see them not as dirty, but as survivors, not as ignorant, but as innovative in their own way. It's a powerful lesson in historical humility, and a good reminder to reserve judgment. Thank you again, my friends, for travelling through the most awkward corners of history with me. It's an honour to have your company. Your time and attention mean the world, and I truly hope this journey has given you a new perspective on the small miracles of your everyday life. But our journey doesn't end here. The past is vast and filled with endless stories just waiting to be told. If you enjoyed this slow, wonderfully weird drift through medieval life, I would be honoured if you'd consider a few things. First, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel. It's the single best way to make sure you don't miss our next adventure into the unknown. When you subscribe, you're not just clicking a button. You're telling me that this type of storytelling, this kind of journey, is something you value, and that means more than I can possibly say. It helps me continue to research, to write, and to bring these stories to life. Second, if this video resonated with you, and you're feeling generous, a simple like on the video would be a wonderful way to show your support. It helps YouTube know that this content is worth sharing, and it allows us to reach other curious minds who might also enjoy stepping through the most awkward corners of history with us. And finally, I'd love to hear from you. In the comments below, please share what surprised you the most about this video. What little detail stuck with you? What did you find most inspiring, or perhaps most disgusting? I read every single comment, and your thoughts and insights are not only valuable, but they help shape where we go next. It helps me know what parts of history you're most interested in exploring. So, as we close this chapter, I want to leave you with a simple thought. Look around you. Appreciate the soap, the warm water, the clean sheets. These aren't just things. They are a legacy. A legacy built on the backs of those who lived without them. A legacy that we have a duty to appreciate and to honor. Next time, we'll be taking another step back in time.